friends, today I am going to discuss about Spring Batch. So before proceeding, please subscribe my channel. So like my channel and share with others. Okay. So let's start. So what is Spring Batch? It is a framework which is used for processing the large amount of data. Okay. So if there is any repetitive task, you can you know do it with the using Spring Batch framework. So let's discuss what is the architecture of Spring Batch. So here we can see these are the components: job repository, job launcher, job step, item reader, item processor and item writer. These are the components. So what is job repository? Job repository is a which stores the metadata about the job. So which stores like status, whether the job is completed or failed or like that. Okay. Job launcher is used for starting the job. Okay. Job, what is job? Job is a collection of steps, so which can have one or more steps. So steps can contain three main components like item reader, item processor, item writer. So what is item reader? Item reader is which is used to read the input data. So it is from like the file or any source of input. Okay. So when it reads the data, so it sends that data as a item to item processor. So item processor will have custom logic where we can write custom logic, process the items. Once we process the items, which returns the result and which is sent to item writer. So item writer is used to write the items, whatever the records it got after item processor, it will be written into any flat file or any db, any kind of source. Okay. You know uh, Final result will be written. So today I am going to discuss reading the data from CSV file and writing the data finally into a S2 database. Okay. So let's start creating a application. So create a new Spring Starter project. Okay. So let's choose Maven, give the name as Spring Batch example. Okay. So let's click on next. So we have to choose a dependency called Spring Batch web, Spring Web. We need a JPA to write the data into DB. Then we need a S2, since we are using S2 database. Then we need a web. We have already added web. Okay. So we are going to add a dev tools. So dev tool is for like auto deploying the application when we make some changes in the code. No need to start. Okay. So let's click on finish. So it is creating the project. Okay. So project is created. Let's add the application properties. So let me copy the properties which I have already there. Okay. So let me explain you what are all things we have added in the application property. So server.port, it is the port where we are running the application. I am giving 80, let's say 89. Okay. And we have to connect to S2 database. So for that one configuration I am adding string data. source URL, that is JDBC s2 mem test db is the db where we are going to add the data. Okay, so this is like default one. And driver class name org.s2 driver, and username, password, SA and password, these are the default one you can use. And database platform ARM, Hibernate dialect, S2 dialect. Okay, Spring S2 console enabled, I am making true. Spring batch job enabled, false, I am making false because I don't want to run this job automatically. I should make it manual, like we will trigger this batch job through controller. Okay, so these are the properties. So CSV file I am going to add. Let me show you what is there in the CSV file. You can see it has a 4 columns: ID, name, department, salary. Okay, so we have few records, 5 records. So I am going to read this file and write the data into S2 database. Let me copy this one file. So one let me copy into resource folder. So I have copied the file. So now we have to process, read this file, process this data and write into S2 database. Okay, so this is the user data. So users, there are records, 5 records in this users.csv. So for that one I am going to create a user entity class to write the data into S2 database. So let's create a package. So I'm creating a package called example.demo.model. Okay, so let me add a class name called user. Okay, so let me add the entity annotation. So before that one I'm going to make some changes in pom.xml. So I will take you through the pom.xml first. So it is having a Spring Boot starter batch. This is the dependency for developing any Spring batch service. So I have added data JPA. So for DB related any operation we can do. Starter web is for creating any web application. So we are creating a controller. So I have added this one. So dev tool is like auto deploying the service. So I have added a S2 database dependency. So rest of all test dependency and Maven plugin is there. So I am going to use the parent version of Spring Boot, that is 2.3.4 release. So this is the compatible version. So I am going to use this one as a Spring Boot version for developing this application. Okay, so let me add a properties. So here I am using Java version as a 17. I will make it as a 15, and I am adding a 2 more properties, that is project dot build dot source encoding. So that is UTF-8. Another property I am going to add, that is output encoding. Okay, so these are the two major changes we have done in the pom.xml. So let's go to user model. So where we are creating a user entity. Okay, so let's add the annotation entity. So I'm defining a ID. Let's add an annotation. I'm going to add a string name and string department, private, integer, salary, private, date, time. So I will explain you why you are adding date. So okay, so we have only ID, name, department, salary in the CSV, but so I will explain you why we are adding the time as a variable. Okay, so let's create a constructors. Okay, let's create a getter setter methods. So let's create a no arg constructor. So let's create a uh, toString method. Okay, so our user entity is ready. So now let's create a user repository. Okay, so let's create first package. Under that one we will create a repository. So let's create a repository. So it's a interface. So let's create a interface. So we will implement JPA repository. Let's add a repository annotation. So let's extend. So now we have created a user repository. Let's import user entity here. Okay, so user repository is ready. So now we will create a configuration, which is the main part of this now developing this application. Okay, so let's create a class called batch config. So let's annotate it with @configuration and @enable batch processing. So this is the main annotations. Okay, so batch configuration should have no configuration related to a job, step, and item reader, item processor, and item writer. So let's create a job configuration. Then inside that one we will add a step. So inside that one we will have a item reader. Okay, so let's create a bean. So so to create a job, we need to add a job build factory. Okay, using the job build factory, we will create a job. We will add a return statement. So we have to create a step also. To create a step, we have to add a step build factory. So step build factory is used for creating the step. Okay, so let's add a item reader. So for each step we have a item reader, item processor, and item writer. So here we are processing the reading the user item. So let's add a item processor. So here we have to pass a user as an input and which produce the user as a output after processing. Okay. So item reader is imported wrong, so let's import the correct package for item reader. Okay, so it is batch item. Let's import user. So finally we have to add item writer. Let's remove this import. So item writer will receive user as a input and write into a database. Okay, so let's import the item. This is spring framework dot batch dot item is a import for item writer. Okay, so let's create a step. So we use a step build factory to create a step dot get. So we have to pass the name. So name I am giving ETL file load. Okay. So here chunk is the it reads the user data from the file in a chunk of 100 records. Okay, so after reading the chunk of 100 records, it has to pass it to item reader. Then it has to pass to processor, that is item processor. Then finally it has to pass to writer, that is item writer. So now we will build a job using a job build factory. So we will add a name called ETL load. So let make it a big one. So now we have to add a incrementer. So incrementer is for every time when you run the job, it gives the new incremented value. Now you have to start the application by passing a step. So I have to return this job. So now we are ready with, okay, so it's giving error for step, so we have to add a import for step. So let's add it manually. So now error is gone. Okay, let's create a bean for item reader. So for reading the item, I am using a flat file item reader. So I am passing a user. So let's create a flat file item reader object. So we have to set the source for reading the file. I am using a file system. So here I am passing the path where the file is exist. So file is exist under source main resources slash users dot csv, the file name. So source main resources slash csv, this is the file under which the file is exist. Okay, so let's set the name of the flat file reader as a csv reader. So you can give any name, it's not mandatory. So we have to skip the first line since the first line is a header of a no that contains a column names, so we have to skip that one. So I am adding that one. Set line to skip as a 1, the first column first line will be skipped. Okay, so I am returning. Okay, so let's fix this. So I am returning a flat file reader. Okay, this is the bean for reading the file. So let's create a line mapper bean. So what is the line mapper is used for? So line mapper is used for, you know, reading the each line of a file. So for that one I am using a default line mapper. So let me explain you after writing the code. So let me write default line mapper. So let's pass user. So once we read the line means the one record of a file. So we have to tokenize that that particular line record, so that we can split those values uh, separated by comma, so that we can read each value and set that into entity. Okay, so for that one we have to create a tokenizer. So I am using a delimit tokenizer. So let's set the properties of line tokenizer. So set the delimiter. So I am using a comma separated delimiter. So since CSV has each values are separated by comma in the CSV file. So I am selecting strict. So what is the name of the columns we have to set here. So to tokenize each column records, we have to give the name of the columns. So we are having ID, name, then department, then salary. These are the four no columns present in the file. So I am setting these names here and tokenizing the values of those columns using a delimiter called comma. Okay, so we have to set all these values of a field into a field, right? So we have to use a bean wrapper field set mapper. So I am creating a object for bean wrapper field set mapper. So I have to set the target for this one. So I am reading the ID, name, department, salary from the user CSV file, and these are like delimited by commas, and setting those values into a user dot class, that is the entity we created, right? So that will be targeted target that will be the target class. So we are using a field set wrapper class to map those values into this target class, that is user entity class we created. So we have to add this tokenizer, line tokenizer, and field set mapper in a default line mapper. So I am going to return finally this default line mapper. So now our configuration is completed. So let me explain you what are all things we have done here. So I have created a job. So for that job we have created a step. In the step I am using a chunk of 100. We are using the we are chunking the hundreds of records from the file and reading it using a item reader, then processing using item processor, then writing using a item writer. So we have to create a each custom class for processor writer. So for reader I have created a bean here, item reader. So here I have created a job using job build factory. So I have given a name as ETL load, and we have passed increment each time when it runs, it add a ID incrementer. Then I am passing step in the start of that job. Okay, so item reader, for that one I am using a flat file item reader. So to read this users.csv file from class path, I am using a flat file item reader. I am setting the name and skipping the first line since it is a columns name. We have to read only the values. So we have to set this line mapper actually into file reader, flat file reader. So I am passing the line mapper into flat file item reader. So line mapper I am creating using a default line mapper object. So for this one I am setting this line tokenizer. So I am tokenizing the each column value by comma separated values. I am separating those comma separated values and using this line tokenizer, and we have to set all those fields values into a entity, user entity. For that one I am using a bean wrapper field set wrapper. Okay, so I am setting tokenizer and field set wrapper. Okay, so this is what our batch config. So now we have already written. So as per our diagram, so we have job and step. We have created item reader. So we need item processor and item writer. Okay, so let me write item processor. So for that one I am creating a package. I am creating a batch as a package. So in this one I am creating a class called processor. So let's add a at the rate component annotation. So I have to implement a item reader, sorry, item processor. A class where we are using user data and processing the user data and returning a processed user data. So here we have to use a method which is process method of a item processor. We are implementing here our own logic to process the user details. So what I am going to write the logic is, here we can write any custom logic to process the user items. So what I am doing is, so in the CSV file we have a department as a column, right? So there we are having a code, department code. So I want to convert that department code into department names. Okay, so for that one I am writing a logic here. So let's create a department names uh, map, mapping the department code into department names. Okay, I am creating a method called public processor. So here in this method I am adding the values into, so let me correct this method. Key values like 001, I am making it as a technology. So 002, I am making department name as a operations. 003, I am making this one as a accounts. So this method is okay, we created. So where here we are adding a key value pair in the department names map. Okay, so let's write our own custom logic to map department code into department ID. Okay, so we have to get the department code from user record and department name we have to get it from the map. Okay, so now I am setting the department name into user object. So I am setting one more attribute called set time. So this is what I used this particular parameter here. So this parameter is not exist in the file. So I am creating a particular time when we are setting the department, that is converting this department code into department name. Okay, so let me add a so I am adding a log printing into a console. So from department code we are converting into department name. Okay, so finally I have to return a user object. So our processor is ready. So where we have added a custom logic to convert the department code into department names. Okay, so I am returning finally the user object. So this user object is passed to item writer. So item writer views this user object entity to save in the database. So for that one we are going to write a item writer. So let me create it name as a db writer. So let's add a component. So we are using user repository to save this item writer, the user entity, right? So I have to auto wire that user repository here. So let's create a let's implement item writer. So this is not the correct package. Let's import batch item, that is the correct package. So let's implement the method from item writer interface. So write is the method we are going to implement here. So which one, which actually write the save the users into DB. So we are using a S2DB, it saves the data into S2DB. So our DB writer is completed now. So what else we left to test the batch? So we are going to create a controller. Let's create a package. Let's create a controller. I'm naming it as a load controller. Let's add the REST controller annotation and request mapping. So I'm adding a dash load as a mapper. Okay. So let me copy the the logic already I have. Okay. I'll explain you what are all things we are doing here. Okay. Let me import all the imports. So now we have imported all the imports. So let me explain you. So for that, to start a job, we need a job launcher. So I am auto wiring that job launcher. So we need a job to start, right? So I am auto wiring job also. So I have created a method called load, which actually launched the job using a job launcher, and which runs that particular job. Okay. So I am returning a batch status, so which tells whether the batch is failed or completely successful. Okay. So to launch a job, we need to pass the job parameters and job. Okay. So we have already auto wired job, right? So the job we have already configured in a batch job config file. Okay. So let's create a job parameter. So job parameter, what I am passing is, so I am creating a map with the job parameter as a value. So job parameter, in that map I am passing a job parameter object with the current timestamp and name it as a key as a time. Okay. So that one I am passing into job parameters object. So I am passing the job parameter object into the job launcher. So it returns a job execution, so I can get the status of that job. So I am printing batch is running and job execution is running. I am printing dot dot dot, and returning finally the status of a job. Okay, so our all code is completed now. So let me take you through one more time what are all things we have done here. So we have created a first we have created a user entity, so which is having id, name, department, salary. The same thing we have seen in user CSV file. So apart from time, so time I have told you where in the processor we are adding a time that is for like for each conversion of a department code into department ID. Okay, that is for what we have used a time. Okay, so I have created a user constructor with all the parameter and no arg parameter getter setter method. So after that I have created a user repository for this user entity using a JPA repository. Okay, after that we have done a batch job configuration. So in this batch job configuration we have created a class called batch config, and we have created a job bean. So in this one we have defined a step and passed that step into a job using a here we are used job build factory to create a job and step build factory to create a step. Okay, so in the step we are passing item reader, processor and writer. Okay, so item reader I am using a flat file item reader, so where I am passing the CSV file path, that is class path, and I am using a line mapper to read each line of a file. So that one, for that one I am using a default line mapper object, and I am creating a line tokenizer and field set mapper objects for to read this each line of a record from the file and tokenize that each value and set it into user entity using a field set mapper. So that is I am returning. Okay, so after that we have already created a item reader, so we need item writer and processor. So processor I am created class called processor, so I am implementing item processor, so which takes user and which converts the department to department code, then finally it returns a user which is having a department. Okay, so it when user the processor process the item, it pass that into writer, right? So db writer have created a new class which implements the item writer. So write is the method which stores the all the user items which we read and processed earlier. So using a user repository I am saving all these records into a S2 database. Okay, this is what our okay. So finally we have a controller. So controller, let's okay, so here I have defined a method called load which launches the job using job launcher. Okay, so returns the batch job status. So let's run this application. Let's build this application first. So I can see build is successful. So let's start the application. So you can see application is started. Let's test with Postman. So application is running in 8089 port. So let's test. So 8089 localhost 8089 / load. You can see status written as completed. It means the application is batch job is completed. You can see the in the console. So converted 001 to technology. So the item is processed and it is printing the console. So in the processor we are printing a system out, right? So that is what it is printed here. So we can see batch is running, job execution is completed. So let's check how whether the data is saved into S2 database or not. So how to check that one? So our application is running in 8089, right? So to check the S2 database, we have to go to S2 console. That is, we have to type localhost 8089 / S2 console. So you can see this is the interface we got. Here you can see driver, JDBC URL, username, password. Okay, these are the things we have already set in the application property, right? So same thing here it is displaying. So let's add the password as a password. Okay, let's connect. So you can see this is the console we got. So here you can see user, right? So let's click on that user. You can see here select star from user. So let's run by clicking on run button. So here you can see the table it created. So it inserted 5 records with ID and department name, salary and time. So we have converted the department to ID to department name. So here you can see department name and name and salary, and finally we have added one more parameter, time. So that is what when it process that particular item. So this is how we create a Spring Batch application. So thank you so much. Please subscribe my channel.